So a brief update on safeguarding everyone in the church today. Catholic Professional Standards Limited commences each session with an acknowledgement, acknowledging the lifelong trauma of abuse victims, survivors and their families, acknowledging the failure of the Catholic Church to protect, believe and respond justly to children and vulnerable adults, and acknowledging the consequent breaches of community trust. So we're privileged to have Sheree here today in such a busy schedule. If anyone's personally affected by this session, then we have Paul Zammit. Paul, just stand up briefly. If anyone would like to talk to Paul during the session or after the session, just outside the door, please do. I'm just going to lead Sheree through a few questions to update us on what's been happening and then to introduce new areas of activity of Catholic Professional Standards Limited. So Sheree, just been going for 2 years on the protection of children. How's it going?
Thanks, Denis. We're going to play microphone hockey for a couple of minutes. So yes, we commenced, it's 2 years ago since I was here with you as the new CEO of the new company, Catholic Professional Standards. And our first focus was the development of a set of safeguarding standards for the protection of children in the church. They were officially adopted by the members of the company. So for us, that's the Bishops' Conference and Catholic Religious Australia, and they were published in May of last year. And how they effectively work is we were able to work with the Royal Commission in the last 6 months of its existence before it published its final report. And we also worked with the Human Rights Commission, who took I forgot to do my slides, but that'll come later. Who took the Royal Commission recommendations about what constitutes a child-safe organisation and turned them into what many of you would know now as the National Principles for Child-Safe Organisations. So the National Catholic Safeguarding Standards take those national principles and effectively contextualise them for the Church in Australia, but also allow us to do one of our second functions, which I'll talk about in a minute, which is then to audit how are church organisations and entities going about their safeguarding practices. The couple of important things to note about the framework, they don't just, or are not just to be applied by parts of the church who would be considered to be actively working with children. They are designed for everyone in the church to adopt, but how they are applied varies depending on if you are actively working with children or not. But it does set a minimum set of requirements, irrespective if you're a very small congregation, perhaps not working with children, perhaps with more retired members than active members, and also voluntary run organisations and ministries and associations of Christ Faithful. They focus essentially in 4 areas, and then I'm going to stop and let Denis ask me his next question. Leadership and improvement, engagement with children and families and communities, our people, so making sure we have the right people in the right role with the right knowledge to do that role, and our systems and processes to support protecting children. And they focus essentially on prevention, but also give guidance to how to respond when concerns or poor behaviour is evident within an organisation.
Thanks, Sheree. We'll get to the website in a minute where, if you're not already familiar with them, you can see the standards set out there. So Sheree, you've commenced audits, you've published some audit results. What's come out of that and what are the implications for social service providers of that audit program?
So in the last 12 months, in the lead up to the launch of the standards, but also the commencement of audit, we've trained over 1,000 people across the church in Australia, bishops, congregational leaders, chief executives, vicars general, parish volunteers, so quite a broad cross-section of people. We've completed 10 audits, 6 reports have been published and they're all available on our website, and if I can get back to the office today, number 7 will be published today. In the middle of this year, so that will be 12 months since we started the audit practice, and so we will publish a report then on the trends and the gaps and also the strengths. And we're also looking this year to increase our engagement with a range of people through the audit. So there's some in the room who've perhaps been through an audit of ours already. So in a diocese, we do go and visit a range of parishes, and we talk to parish councils, parish priests, to parish secretaries, safeguarding officers. But we'll look this year to have a concerted effort to engage with families and also with children. And staff and volunteers more broadly across the diocese, and the same in congregations. So if we're going into a congregation with quite active ministries, we'll seek to meet with a group or representatives from across ministries or members of the congregation, and we'll look to broaden the engagement. In terms of social services sector implications, our principle first up, which I think I said 12 months ago, was that we weren't seeking to duplicate where there was already external government regulation or oversight. So broadly speaking, education, social services, health and aged care have not been our primary focus. Our primary focus has been on working with the parts of the church and the ministries where there isn't that external oversight. However, recent events that have come to light in the last couple of weeks in relation to St Kevin's, where you would have thought the government oversight might have been working more closely with a case such as that, has led us to pretty quickly decide to prioritise actually doing the work on mapping what we call interoperability, which just means what's the gap? What's the gap between what your social services might currently need to report to government for, conscious that you're reporting on multiple levels, probably across multiple funding channels, but are there things that the Catholic standards require of you that no government regulator is going to look at anyway, so that we can actually start actively auditing, and we're doing that with education and aged care, and some of that will link in a minute when I talk about the vulnerable adult piece. So there will start to be, we would imagine at this stage, that we'll start actively auditing social services in 2021.
Okay, Sheree, 3 years ago you were leading Catholic care in Melbourne. It probably seems a long 3 years. What impact, what difference on the ground have you seen from your trajectory?
This is a very interesting question, and it's very hard to measure really, but I think there's 4 things for me in thinking about this, where we are today. The first one was not to underestimate the significance of having the standards adopted in the first place. You're all in the room, you all understand the notion of church time. So it was pretty quick. We took less than 2 years to have a set of pretty robust and specific requirements adopted and agreed to across the church. So I think that was the first thing, and that process meant that there was an ongoing conversation that had obviously started a long time ago and was definitely alive during the life of the Royal Commission, but it also started to hopefully shift the conversation to prevention and what can be done to protect children here and now. The second thing for me then is engagement. It's certainly not perfect, and if anyone's really interested, we do now publish a report on our website about which entities are engaging with us in our processes, so who's been involved in training, but also who's working towards an audit, and when are those audits scheduled. So if you really want to have a look at the engagement piece, but it is increasingly encouraging as I travel the country, the depth of understanding and commitment to making changes, perhaps not as fast as I might like, but nonetheless changes Increasing awareness of prevention in a really practical sense. I think that's the other thing. Talking recently to other faith groups across the National Council of Churches network, some of the work we've done, I think, has sped up people's capacity to take those principles that can often seem quite esoteric and airy-fairy to say, well, what does it actually mean to lead a child-safe environment? What does that look like? The work we've done and the training we've done is giving people practical tools to do that work. And the fourth thing for me in terms of impact, although it's not necessarily impact, but I suppose I thought about it when I was listening to Lana in the breakfast briefing this morning, is the advantage that I have of having very clear purpose and very clear governance. So we are a company, I do have a board, the board are very clear, and we were given a clear purpose and we're executing it. So any sort of distraction or potential to move off track is quite easily, well, not easily, but, you know, has been able to be dealt with because of the clarity of governance, and I think that's critical.
Standards to cover vulnerable adults, and could you lead us through that and what the implications for us are? Thanks.
Thanks, Denis. So yes, we have now, so our remit was children and vulnerable adults and the protection of both, the safeguarding of both in the church. So we have commenced the work on developing the vulnerable adults framework. We commenced in November of last year, and this time we're doing it a little bit differently. When we developed the children's standards, we sort of wrote a whole lot of things based on what the Royal Commission gave us, and then went on a roadshow around the country to hear from people, and we had quite an open consultation process. This time around we've started with the guidance of a very experienced reference group drawn from key stakeholders, and I'll show you who's on the group in a minute, some are in the room, but from across ministries and sectors within the church, but also experts from outside the church to guide our development of a set of standards for the protection of adults. We've also been working very closely with the Human Rights Commission and also staying in touch with the 3 Royal Commissions, the Disability Aged Care at federal levels and the Mental Health Royal Commission here in Victoria, to make sure that what we develop is in line with their emerging thinking out of their work in the Royal Commissions. And as with the children, the framework does consider both regulated and unregulated ministries of the church. So we're looking broadly across those aspects. In terms of the guiding principles, if you like, that we're testing as we develop the framework, that we're looking to have a single set of standards. So we're not looking at 2 different sets, but we're saying the 10 standards that we have now that obviously came from the protection of children at the standard level, stand a test to say, well, these are the same 10 things that you would need to have in place to protect adults. We're looking at making sure that the approach is, again, similar to what the children's standards are, so rights-focused, trauma-informed and strengths-based. We're also, and we've tested this with the reference group, and we'll come and talk to people more about it in the coming weeks and months, but we're seeking to not define victims, so to speak. So instead of using necessarily the language of these standards, protect vulnerable adults, we're wanting to say all people engaged in the church have the right to be safe. But as, again, with the children's framework, it was all children have the right to be safe, but there are some children who have other vulnerabilities that put them at further risk. Similarly, in adults, there are a range of things, both permanent, permanent situations, disability, age, that put them in extra risk, but also life risks, grief and loss, or separation, divorce. So there's a range of things that might cause adults to be more vulnerable, but our approach will be to not say this is about defining whether someone is vulnerable in order to class them as a victim. We're looking at engaging with those with a lived experience of failed protection within the church. So just as with the Royal Commission, we clearly had a very strong voice from survivors of child sexual abuse, and we also did some consultation with children before we published the child standards. We'll do the same with these in terms of hearing from those with lived experience. And we're about to commence a consultation process with services and ministries engaged in these spaces all the time, so yourselves, the health, aged care and disability sector, tertiary education, formation programs and others. So to that end, I had very limited time this morning, so I'm trying something. If you happen to have a device with you, if you could type in that URL, it will take you to a survey, and we would love your input. You don't have to do it straight away. You can do it while I'm talking to you about who's on the reference group, if you like. There's only 6 questions. First screen is you have to give consent to give us, because we ask for your name. So click OK or click yes. And then there'll be 6 questions that then we will gather and provide to the reference group as one form of feedback. The questions today are pretty broad, and there'll be plenty more opportunities. In fact, one of the questions is, do you want to be part of a broader consultation? So give us your details so we can get in touch with you. But if you can take the time some point today to do the survey, that would be really, really appreciated. Has everyone got the URL in their machine yet? I can leave it there. You don't need to see the next. Oh yeah, you probably do need to see the next slide. So in terms of where we're up to right now, as I've said, the reference group is currently meeting and helping us refine some of those design questions. So the question of the 10 standards holding true, how would an approach of trying to protect all adults look like? Is the current framework robust enough to manage both children and adults? And then we're drafting, I'm going to click the slide, so if you haven't quite got the URL, you could take a photo maybe. We're actually testing the logic with a couple of the standards. So we've started to do some drafting with Standard 1, which is around leadership and governance, and Standard 4, which is about equity and diversity. Then we'll come out and do some consultations once we have a robust enough framework for people to respond to. We'll finalise those and then develop some guidance material as we did with the child standards, and we're aiming to have all of that done by the middle of this year, which is a little bit ambitious, but we're sticking to it. And then we're looking to have the adoption of the second edition of the standards, which would cover children and adults, in the second half of this year. So, in terms of who's on the reference group, I think I've nearly exactly held to time. So as I said before, there's a range of people from across the country and expertise. So Libby Byrne is a Doctor of Psychology from La Trobe University. Joe Caddy will be known to many of you as the Vicar General here in the Archdiocese and a long-time servant of social services in the country. Maria Harries, obviously, people know. John Lockowich from the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Catholic Council. Trish Mowbray, some of you will know, who works with the Bishop's Commission for Social Justice, but her particular area of expertise is in disabilities. Nikki Patton from the Institute of the Sisters of Mercy of Australia and Papua New Guinea. Matt Peel, some of you may know from Calvary Health, or from Calvary Aged Care, sorry. Susan Ryan would be known to many of you, former Senator and Age Discrimination and Disability Commissioner. Peter Selwood, where is Peter? I saw you before, there he is. From Centacare Brisbane, Sean Tynan from the Diocese of Maitland, Newcastle, and Shane Wall from the Christian Brothers. So we brought together, as I explained at the start, a group from a range of both service providers and ministries within the church and external to the church to help us do some of the critical thinking as we shape the framework. So, Denis is probably going to say thank you or something, but that's okay. I just wanted to leave you with a quote. I think last time I was here, I was with Robert Fitzgerald, and Robert has left us with many, oh God, I get emotional every time I think about his work, but many pearls of wisdom. And one of them is one I use all the time around safeguarding. Now, obviously, this was in the context of child safe organisations, but I think this is about any safe organisation. It takes a community of commitment, and there's no doubt this room is full of commitment. Knowledge. Equally, this room is full of knowledge, but also conversation. And again, Lana challenged us to do that this morning in the context of the Plenary Council. I think safeguarding is no different. The conversation has to be continued and has to be had about the rights of our children and our vulnerable adults and all of us within the church. So I encourage you to stay with the conversation. Get in touch with us through a range of media. We're now on social media, which is a little bit scary, but feel free to give us a follow on Twitter. And we're also back here in June for our first safeguarding conference on the 20th of June, back in this very room. So you'd be more than welcome to join us for that as well, which has a focus of a safer church for all, safeguarding core to mission. So thank you very much.